Hello, I'm Ravi Visvesvaraya Sharada Prasad. On 18 January 1977, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi sprang a surprise when she addressed the nation on AIR, on All India Radio, and she announced that elections to the Lok Sabha would be held in March 1977. And Indira Gandhi also stated that the emergency would be relaxed. And her second son, Sanjay Gandhi, was kept totally in the dark, and he had an angry showdown with her after he came to know about it from her radio broadcast on AIR, on All India Radio. And Kuldeep Nair has written in his book that Sanjay Gandhi had told Kuldeep Nair that he did not intend to hold elections for decades. The popular notion is that Indira Gandhi called for elections because intelligence agencies gave her reports that she would win 330 seats. But this is not the full picture. In November 1976 itself, Indira Gandhi had told her principal secretary, Professor P.N. Dhar, and my late father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, who was her information advisor. So Indira Gandhi told P.N. Dhar and my father, I am going to call off the emergency and hold elections. I know that I will lose, but this is something which I have to do. And then Indira Gandhi added to P.N. Dhar and to my father, the intelligence agencies will tell me what they think I want to hear, but I know that I am going to lose, even though the IB is saying that I will win 330 seats. However, it is necessary for me to call for elections. And then on 2nd February 1977, Jagjivan Ram and Hemvati Nandan Bahuguna and Nandini Satpathy, they sprang a total surprise when they defected from the Congress and they set up their own party called CFD, the Congress for Democracy. And Indira Gandhi was taken totally by surprise. She had no clue about this at all, not even from the intelligence agencies. And Indira Gandhi told my father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, it is all over now. I am sure to lose the elections now. But then again, in a cryptic, mysterious remark, Indira Gandhi said to my father, it will be a relief if I lose, an absolute relief. And then before announcing his resignation to the media, Jagjivan Ram telephoned JP, Loknayak Jayaprakash Narayan, and JP issued a statement. I congratulate Jagjivan Ram Babu on his resignation from the Central Cabinet and the Congress Party. I am sure that the Janata Party will welcome him with open arms. And then JP added in his statement, I would also like to congratulate Bahuguna and Nandini Satpathy, who too are reported to have resigned from the Congress. This is a historic moment, and I think the coming elections will change the course of history and give a new lease of life to democracy and our democratic institutions and strengthen the power of the people. So this is what JP said in his statement. And the intelligence agencies came to know about the defection only when Jagjivan Ram and H.N. Bahuguna and Nandini Satpathy began to address a press conference. And in this press conference, Bahuguna derisively referred to the emergency as a 1.5-person rule. And about Bahuguna, Indira Gandhi had a very grudging admiration for the wily, the cunning Hemvati Nandan Bahuguna's uncanny ability to anticipate changing political trends and predict political events months in advance and always place himself on the winning side. And so Indira Gandhi told my father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, that now that Bahuguna has abandoned me, I will be wiped out in Uttar Pradesh. And again, well, to digress a little about how Hemvati Nandan Bahuguna was so popular with the rank and file grassroots political workers. Once during elections in Uttar Pradesh, the prime contenders for the chief ministership were K.C. Pant, the son of Govind Vallabh Pant, K.C. Pant and H.N. Bahuguna. And Indira Gandhi told my father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, keep a close watch on both of them. K.C. Pant will hang around me all the time, trying to impress me. But Bahuguna will spend all his time in the field with our party workers, drumming up grassroots support. And this actually happened. Bahuguna turned down a lunch invitation from Indira Gandhi, preferring to have lunch with the rank and file grassroots political workers. And Indira Gandhi then told my father that Bahuguna can become the chief minister even if I oppose him. But K.C. Pant will not be able to win even his own seat without my endorsement and my support. And in fact, this is what happened. All the Congress party workers in Uttar Pradesh, they deserted Indira Gandhi en masse to join H.N. Bahuguna in his Congress for Democracy. And a stunned, shocked Indira Gandhi could only give a very lame, lukewarm response to Jagjivan Ram. And Indira Gandhi said, I fail to understand why you have resigned when elections have been announced. Most of the restrictions under the emergency have been relaxed, press censorship has been withdrawn, and political prisoners released. And Indira Gandhi went on, it is strange that you have remained silent all these months and made baseless charges only now. Even at the AICC meeting in Guwahati, you had fully supported our policies and you had never expressed any reservation or doubt, whether directly or indirectly. But even then, Indira Gandhi, she did not lose her sense of humor. And the day that Jagjivan Ram defected was also the day that the Indian cricket team won a consolation test match against Tony Gregg's visiting MCC team. And India had already lost the test series, but they won the last consolation test. So Indira Gandhi remarked to my father and to H.Y. Sharada Prasad, as usual, the Indian press has absolutely no news sense at all. The correct priority of the headlines should be India wins test, then Jagjivan Ram resigns. Elections to the Lok Sabha were held from 16th to 20th March 1977, and the hastily cobbled together Janata Party obtained 298 seats, and together with its allies, it got won 345 seats, and the ruling Congress Party and its allies obtained only 189 seats. So one of the last acts of the defeated Indira Gandhi government, as it submitted its resignation to the acting president B.D. Jatti, was to end the emergency. And the acting president B.D. Jatti, he detained the Home Minister Brahmananda Reddy as a hostage in Rashtrapati Bhavan until the notification was printed in the government gazette. And the printing happened at 4 a.m. because B.D. Jatti, the acting president, he wants to ensure that Sanjay Gandhi did not try any last-minute tricks, and so he held the outgoing Home Minister as a hostage. Then the rifts and the contradictions and the very hastily cobbled together Janata coalition became apparent even before it took office. And the defeated Indira Gandhi had actually dubbed the Janata coalition as a khichdi, as a porridge, as a mishmash khichdi. And Morarji Desai and Babu Jagjivan Ram and Chaudhary Charan Singh and Chandrasekhar, they all claimed that they should become the Prime Minister. And my maternal uncle, K.S. Radhakrishna, he was head of the Gandhi Peace Foundation, and he was the closest aide and advisor of JP, of Loknayak Jayaprakash Narayan for decades. And my maternal uncle, together with his fellow Sarvodaya associates of Mahatma Gandhi, Narayan Bhai Desai, Siddharaj Dada, and Govindrao Deshpande. So they made Morarji Desai the Prime Minister, even though Jagjivan Ram and Charan Singh had much greater numbers. And even though the erstwhile Bharatiya Janasangh faction had obtained 102 MPs out of 345 in the Janata coalition, the Bharatiya Janasangh had merged itself into the Janata Party. The Janasangh faction did not stake a claim for the prime ministership, and they preferred a low-key wait and watch strategy. And even though his CFD, the Congress for Democracy, had won only 28 seats, Babu Jagjivan Ram, he got the 102 MPs belonging to the erstwhile Bharatiya Janasangh. And Jagjivan Ram also got 35 MPs belonging to the Socialist Bloc to support his claim for the prime ministership. And Jagjivan Ram, of course, had the total support of all the Harijans and the Dalits across the country. But what Jagjivan Ram managed to do is that he managed to persuade Chandrasekhar to drop his own claim and to support him, to support Jagjivan Ram instead. And Jagjivan Ram also managed to obtain the support of George Fernandez and N.G. Gore. And then, of course, Jagjivan Ram had the broad support of all the stalwarts of his own CFD, the Congress for Democracy, H.N. Bahuguna and Nandini Satpathy. And in fact, the CFD was nicknamed the Congress for Defectors by Indira Gandhi. And then Chaudhary Charan Singh rallied his support base among the farmers and the Jats. And it became clear that Charan Singh commanded the support of the second largest chunk of the newly elected MPs after Jagjivan Ram. And my maternal uncle K.S. Radhakrishna and his three fellow Sarvodaya Gandhians, they were of the opinion that either Jagjivan Ram or Charan Singh as Prime Minister would be disastrous to the nation. The massive corruption of Jagjivan Ram was well known, and there were numerous questions over Charan Singh as well. And Charan Singh and Jagjivan Ram had detested each other for decades, and if either was made the Prime Minister, the other would immediately try to pull him down. And my maternal uncle K.S. Radhakrishna, he was head of the Gandhi Peace Foundation, and he was the closest advisor of Loknayak Jayaprakash Narayan. And his three fellow Sarvodaya Gandhians, they determined that the best person to become the Prime Minister was Morarji Desai. And not only was Morarji Desai a very highly experienced politician, and he was an outstanding administrator, but Morarji Desai also had the strongest moral claim, because it was Morarji Desai's fast unto death which led to the fall of the Chimanbai Patel government in Gujarat in February 1974. And Morarji Desai was near death, and Indira Gandhi just had to concede defeat and she had to suspend the Gujarat Assembly, and she dismissed Chimanbai Patel as the chief minister of Gujarat. And also, most importantly, Morarji Desai, he had been in solitary confinement from the very first hour of the emergency uh, till the last day of the emergency when the elections were declared. And Morarji had firmly resisted all offers from Indira Gandhi of a rapprochement, unlike many other opposition leaders such as Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Charan Singh, who gave apologies to Indira Gandhi and to come out of jail. The problem was that Morarji Desai was disliked by most of his contemporaries because of his arrogance, his ambition, his massive superiority complex, his know-it-all attitude, his obstinacy, his puritanical, moralistic sermonizing. And this is why the syndicate had worked to ensure Morarji Desai's defeat after the deaths of both Jawaharlal Nehru in 1964 and of Lal Bahadur Shastri in 1966. And the syndicate's motto was anyone but Morarji. And the hatred between Jagjivan Ram and Morarji Desai had also dated back to around 1960, when, after the demise of Govind Ballabh Pant, these two had been involved in a bitter power struggle while in Nehru's cabinet, to be declared as the number two to Jawaharlal Nehru. And Jagjivan Ram had even then asked Indira Gandhi for her support, but both Jagjivan Ram and Morarji Desai were eased out under the Kamaraj plan in August 1963 to October 1963, and they lost out to Lal Bahadur Shastri. Then, most importantly, there also had been strained relations between Morarji Desai and Jayaprakash Narayan since the 1950s. Morarji Desai was 6 years older than Jayaprakash Narayan. Morarji was born in 1896 and JP in 1902. And Charan Singh was also born in 1902, and Jagjivan Ram was born in 1908. But Morarji Desai greatly resented the moral authority and the saintly aura of his junior JP. And Morarji Desai had long considered himself as the rightful successor to Jawaharlal Nehru, and Morarji resented that Jawaharlal Nehru had actually wanted JP to succeed him as Prime Minister. And in 1952, Jawaharlal Nehru had invited JP Jayaprakash Narayan to join his cabinet as Deputy Prime Minister and to be groomed as his successor. And again, the styles and personalities of Morarji Desai and JP were totally different. The very strictly disciplined and methodical Morarji Desai thought that JP was a destructive anarchist who vacillated all the time, and actually this was correct, because Indira Gandhi had also dubbed JP as a theoretician of chaos. And it was Subramanian Swamy in 1974, 1975 that Subramanian Swamy persuaded Morarji Desai and JP to set aside their personal dislikes and to unite for the higher cause of defeating Indira Gandhi. And Chandrasekhar also was very close to JP, and in fact, JP considered Chandrasekhar to be his political heir, and Chandrasekhar too detested Morarji Desai. So Babu Jagjivan Ram, he very cleverly, very shrewdly played upon Chandrasekhar's dislike for Morarji Desai, and Jagjivan Ram persuaded Chandrasekhar to withdraw from the contest and instead support Jagjivan Ram. So these four Sarvodaya Gandhians, the Sarvodaya Quartet, they also determined that Nanaji Deshmukh should be the deputy prime minister. And the widely respected Nanaji Deshmukh of the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, he had been second only to JP in leading the opposition to Indira Gandhi since 1974. And it was Nanaji Deshmukh who had persuaded the numerous factions from the extreme left to the extreme right, the Socialists, the Congress O, the BLD, Lokdal, the Janasangh, and the Swatantra, the Free Market Swatantra, to all unite together to form the Janata Coalition. And Nanaji Deshmukh also had a very high moral stature because of his decades of selfless social work. And Nanaji had a very modern, technocratic outlook. Nanaji Deshmukh was a graduate from BITS Pilani, the Birla Institute of Technology and Science at Pilani. So the conciliatory, unifying Nanaji Deshmukh would be ideal to offset the drawbacks of the haughty, arrogant, rigid Morarji Desai. Now, confident that they had the support of at least 165 MPs out of 345, Jagjivan Ram and Hembati Nandan Bahuguna pressed for an open election. So my maternal uncle K.S. Radhakrishna and his three fellow Sarvodaya Gandhians, they persuaded Jagjivan Ram and Hembati Nandan Bahuguna that an open election would be divisive for the newly formed Janata Coalition. So the Sarvodaya Quartet reminded Jagjivan Ram and H.N. Bahuguna that it was the Congress Party election of January 1966, in which Indira Gandhi had defeated Morarji Desai by 355 votes to 169 votes for the prime ministership. That it was this Congress Party election which had set into motion the rifts and the fissures which led to the Congress Party splitting apart in 1969. And so my mama, my K.S. Radhakrishna, my maternal uncle, together with his fellow Sarvodaya associates of Mahatma Gandhi, that's Narayan Bhai Desai, Siddharaj Dada, and Govindrao Deshpande, they impressed upon Jayaprakash Narayan to rise above his personal dislike of Morarji Desai and to endorse Morarji Desai for the prime ministership. And a very magnanimous, large-hearted JP readily agreed, because he too, JP also felt that Morarji Desai was the best qualified candidate, even though Morarji Desai was universally disliked by everyone. And time was running short because under the constitution, the new government had to be in place by the evening of 24th March 1977. So the previous day, on the evening of 23rd March 1977, my mama, K.S. Radhakrishna, he carried out a fait accompli by announcing to the press that Acharya J.B. Kripalani and J.P. would announce the name of the Prime Minister and the composition of the cabinet at noon the next day at his Rouse Avenue residence. So each of the 345 newly elected Janata MPs would give a note to Acharya J.B. Kripalani and J.P. indicating whom they supported for the Prime Ministership as well as for the other cabinet portfolios. And there would be no open election, and the final decision would be that of J.P. and of Acharya J.B. Kripalani alone. So my maternal uncle K.S. Radhakrishna, together with his fellow Sarvodaya associates of Mahatma Gandhi, that is Narayan Bhai Desai, Siddharaj Dada, and Govindrao Deshpande, they worked throughout the night to ensure a unanimous consensus in favor of Morarji Desai. And the four of them, they had excellent credibility because they're very high moral stature, and they're being above the lures of political office. They would not benefit at all, no matter whom they made the prime minister. And all the Janata MPs knew that both JP and Acharya JB Kripalani would go totally by their advice, would abide by their advice. So the Sarvodaya quartet, they informed all the MPs that JP strongly favored Morarji Desai, and they heavily emphasized that Jagjivan Ram had held a comfortable cabinet post all through the emergency, while the rest of them had struggled in jail in very harsh conditions. And further, the corruption of Jagjivan Ram was heavily underlined, as well as the fact that it was Jagjivan Ram who had actually sponsored the emergency legislations in Parliament. But the problem was that JP had praised Jagjivan Ram on numerous occasions as an able, outstanding administrator, and even in the months before the emergency. And Indira Gandhi had never ever trusted Jagjivan Ram because she very well knew that he would overthrow her at the slightest chance he got, and he would become the prime minister, try to become the prime minister himself. And JP's lavish praise for Jagjivan Ram's administrative acumen made Indira Gandhi more and more suspicious of Jagjivan Ram, and this was one of the reasons why she did not step down as Prime Minister after the Allahabad High Court verdict, which had declared her election invalid. So the Janata Party MPs, they took it for granted that JP's preferred choice was Jagjivan Ram, because JP had praised only Jagjivan Ram, and JP had not praised Morarji Desai nor Charan Singh. And Shanti Bhushan too was dead set against Jagjivan Ram. Shanti Bhushan had been the lawyer for Raj Narayan and his election petition against Indira Gandhi, and Shanti Bhushan was also the treasurer of the Congress O party. And after the Janata coalition was formed, Shanti Bhushan was made the treasurer of the coalition. So Shanti Bhushan went to JP and strongly argued against JP's perceived support for Jagjivan Ram. And Chaudhry Charan Singh was provoked into saying that if Jagjivan Ram was elected as the Prime Minister, then he, that is Charan Singh, and all his supporters would immediately leave the Janata coalition. And because of the tension, Charan Singh developed chest pains, and he had to be admitted to the Wellington Hospital. Now it's Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital. So during those few hours when Charan Singh was in the hospital, he was totally outmaneuvered by the Sarvodaya quartet, who emphasized to all the MPs that Charan Singh had been released from prison as early as March 1976, after Charan Singh had tendered a very abject apology to Indira Gandhi. So K.S. Radhakrishna and Narayan Bhai Desai and Siddharaj Dada and Govindrao Deshpande, first they tried to persuade Chandrasekhar to drop his support for Jagjivan Ram and instead support Morarji Desai. But Chandrasekhar, who absolutely detested Morarji Desai, Chandrasekhar absolutely flatly refused to do so. So then the four Sarvodaya Gandhians, they met Lal Krishna Advani of the Janasangh, and L.K. Advani told them that the Janasangh group was supporting Jagjivan Ram only because they were under the impression that Jagjivan Ram was the choice of JP. And the Sarvodaya Quartet then informed L.K. Advani that, on the contrary, the large-hearted JP had actually come around to supporting Morarji Desai in spite of their mutual antipathy. And the four of them offered 3 senior cabinet posts to the Janasangh faction, including the deputy prime ministership to Nanaji Deshmukh. And then the 4 Sarvodaya Gandhians, then they went and met Nanaji Deshmukh. And Nanaji Deshmukh also told them that the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, was supporting Jagjivan Ram only because they were under the impression that Jagjivan Ram was the choice of JP. So the Sarvodaya Quartet then informed Nanaji Deshmukh that JP had risen above his dislike of Morarji Desai to endorse him as the best choice. And these 4 then offered Nanaji Deshmukh the deputy prime ministership and 2 other senior posts to the Janasangh faction. And the Sarvodaya Quartet, then they went and met Biju Patnaik, and Biju Patnaik told them that if Jagjivan Ram was made the prime minister, then both he and Charan Singh would immediately walk out of the Janata coalition. And then Shanti Bhushan also tried to persuade all the Janasangh MPs to drop their support for Jagjivan Ram. Then the 4 Sarvodaya Gandhians, led by my maternal uncle K.S. Radhakrishna, they went and met Atal Bihari Vajpayee of the Bharatiya Janasangh. And Vajpayee knew how much the puritanical Morarji Desai detested him because of his libertine lifestyle, and Vajpayee drew a very hard bargain. And Vajpayee drank alcohol and he had lady friends, which absolutely appalled the puritanical Morarji Desai, who had hated him for years. So Vajpayee drove a very hard bargain, and Vajpayee emphasized that 91 of the 102 Janasangh MPs belonged to his camp and they were totally under his control. And in fact, that he, that is Vajpayee, himself had a very strong claim to be the prime minister instead of Morarji Desai, or at least the deputy prime minister instead of Nanaji Deshmukh. So then the 4 Sarvodaya Gandhians, they blackmailed Atal Bihari Vajpayee. They blackmailed Atal Bihari Vajpayee that his ignominious role during the emergency would go against him. And Vajpayee, he had been in very ill health. He had been in and out of hospital, and he had had numerous surgeries, and he had spent most of the emergency under parole in his residence after Vajpayee had given an undertaking to Indira Gandhi as early as September 1975 that he would not oppose the emergency. And Vajpayee had even indicated to Indira Gandhi that he was prepared to sever his links with the RSS if that would enable him to stay out of jail. And the most significant was that in the last week of December 1976, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, of his own accord, Vajpayee had visited the notorious Om Mehta, who was the Minister of State for Home and the right-hand man of Sanjay Gandhi. And Om Mehta was responsible for several of the excesses of the emergency. And on his return from this meeting with Om Mehta, and Vajpayee went on his own initiative. It was not as if Om Mehta had invited Vajpayee. Vajpayee went on his own to meet Om Mehta. So on his return, Vajpayee ordered the student activists of the ABVP, the Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, which was the student wing of the RSS. So Vajpayee ordered the ABVP students to tender an unconditional apology to Indira Gandhi, and the ABVP students flatly refused to apologize to Indira Gandhi, stating that they would rather remain in jail than apologize to Indira Gandhi. And then there is also evidence that Vajpayee was prepared to reveal the whereabouts of the RSS and the Janasangh activists who were still underground, such as Subramanian Swamy and Madhav Rao Mule, and to get them all arrested by Sanjay Gandhi and by Indira Gandhi. But the surprising thing, in spite of all this, is that 91 of the 102 Janasangh MPs were firmly under Vajpayee's control. Very mysterious. Whereas all the other RSS and the Janasangh activists and the ABVP students who had been jailed and harassed during the emergency in very harsh conditions, they were sidelined. So the Sarvodaya quartet threatened Vajpayee. They threatened him that if he did not support Morarji Desai, then all this information would be made public. But even after the meeting with Vajpayee ended, the four of them could not be certain of what Vajpayee would actually do. So at noon on 24th March 1977, the newly elected MPs began to assemble at the Rouse Avenue residence. Now it is Deen Dayal Upadhyay Marg, the Rouse Avenue residence of my maternal uncle K.S. Radhakrishna, to convey their choices to JP and to Acharya J.B. Kripalani. And JP sprung a total shock by insisting that Subramanian Swamy come and sit together with him and Acharya J.B. Kripalani while they ascertained the views of each MP. And actually, it was Subramanian Swamy who, in 1974, he had persuaded JP and Morarji Desai to set aside their mutual antipathy and to work together for the larger cause of dethroning Indira Gandhi. And in fact, after the negotiations between JP and Indira Gandhi broke down in 1974, it was JP who asked Subramanian Swamy to introduce him to Nanaji Deshmukh of the RSS. And JP had then declared that if anything happened to him, then Nanaji Deshmukh would take over the leadership of his Andolan. And Nanaji Deshmukh in turn declared that if anything happened to him, because both JP and Nanaji Deshmukh had been brutally beaten up by the police in Patna in November 1974, and they were very seriously injured into this lathi charge by the police. So Nanaji Deshmukh declared that if anything happened to him, then Sundar Singh Bhandari of the RSS would take over the leadership of the Sampurna Kranti Andolan. And Indira Gandhi had an absolute visceral hatred of the RSS because the RSS was antithetical to her own ideals of India as a nation. And so once JP got the RSS involved in the Sampurna Kranti Andolan, the battle lines were drawn. And in fact, one of Indira Gandhi's major objectives in declaring the emergency was to absolutely, totally destroy the RSS once and for all. And again, well, okay, to return back to what happened at my mama's residence, there was still no certainty that Morarji Desai would be named in preference to Jagjivan Ram and Charan Singh. And the Sarvodaya quartet knew that they could not depend on Atal Bihari Vajpayee and his 91 MPs to support Morarji Desai. So Shanti Bhushan went off to read the Riot Act to Atal Bihari Vajpayee, And in fact, Shanti Bhushan later mentioned that Vajpayee had sobbed like a baby, was just crying and crying. And then the four Sarvodaya Gandhians, they were also very, very puzzled by JP asking Subramanian Swamy to come and sit together with him and Acharya JB Kripalani. So that is when the four Sarvodaya Gandhians decided to pull out their Brahmastra, their supreme uh, weapon. And they enlisted the help of the very wily manipulators Chandrabhanu Gupta and Raj Narayan to work on Chaudhry Charan Singh, who had been admitted to Willingdon Hospital with chest pains. Now, Chandrabhanu Gupta, he had been the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh numerous times, and Raj Narayan, Indira Gandhi's nemesis. They rushed to the Willingdon Hospital and they told Charan Singh that his enemy, Jagjivan Ram, was just a few minutes away from being elected as the Prime Minister. And then they added that the Deputy Prime Minister would be Charan Singh's nemesis, which was Hemvati Nandan Bahuguna. And this was not true at all. This was a ruse, it was a trick, because there was no way at all that Bahuguna could become the Deputy Prime Minister, because both the Prime Minister of Jagjivan Ram and the Deputy Prime Minister could not come from the same small party, the CFD, which had only 28 seats out of the 345 seats in the coalition. And then Charan Singh had hated H.N. Bahuguna. H.N. Bahuguna and Charan Singh they were arch enemies in Uttar Pradesh politics for decades. So Charan Singh hated Hemvati Nandan Bahuguna even more than he detested Jagjivan Ram. And Charan Singh just fell hook, line, and sinker for this trick, this absolutely false ruse stratagem. So Chandrabhanu Gupta and Raj Narayan, they told Charan Singh that he had only a few minutes left to prevent the anointing of Jagjivan Ram and H.N. Bahuguna, and the only way that he could do so was by himself withdrawing from the contest and supporting Morarji Desai himself. So what Chandrabhanu Gupta and Raj Narayan did is that they drafted a letter which was purporting to be from Charan Singh, and they got Charan Singh to sign this letter. So this letter addressed to JP said that Charan Singh would prefer to go back to being jailed by Indira Gandhi in her prisons rather than work under Jagjivan Ram and H.N. Bahuguna. And so he, that is Charan Singh, was withdrawing from the contest, and he was going to be transferring all his support to Morarji Desai. And for good measure, Chandrabhanu Gupta and Raj Narayan, they added several sentences highly praising Morarji Desai and severely castigating Jagjivan Ram for being a senior cabinet minister during the emergency. And then these two forced Charan Singh to append his signature to this letter addressed to JP. And interestingly, 2 years later in 1979, when Charan Singh rebelled against Morarji Desai so that he himself could become the Prime Minister in July 1979 with the help of Sanjay Gandhi, this letter was pulled out to show that Charan Singh was a backstabbing turncoat. And so Chandrabhanu Gupta and Raj Narayan, they rushed from Willingdon Hospital, Lohia Hospital. It's now Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital. So they rushed to the residence of my maternal uncle K.S. Radhakrishna, and they interrupted the MPs filing past JP and Acharya JB Kripalani. And Chandrabhanu Gupta dramatically read out the letter which had been signed by Charan Singh, transferring his support to Morarji Desai. And Subramanian Swamy later recounted, I was there when with JP when Vajpayee came running panting for breath, and expressed his support to Morarji. Jayaprakash Narayan turned towards me, that is, turned towards Subramanian Swami, and winked his gleaming eyes and smiled. Poor Jagjivan Ram was not aware of these developments. So, this is what Subramanian Swami had recounted later. And then again, without waiting for all the MPs to complete conveying their preferences to JP and Acharya JP Kripalani, so Chandrabhanu Gupta rushed outdoors and he announced to the huge press corps that was anxiously waiting outside that JP and Acharya JP Kripalani had unanimously decided on Morarji Desai with Jagjivan Ram and Charan Singh to hold the heavyweight portfolios of defense and of home affairs. So Jagjivan Ram and H.N. Bahuguna, they realized that they had been tricked and outwitted totally. So Jagjivan Ram and Hembati Nandan Bahuguna and George Fernandez and Ramdhan, they threw a furious tantrum at being outwitted. And Jagjivan Ram, all of them told the press people who were assembled there that this was a murder of democracy, far, far worse than anything that Indira Gandhi had done during the emergency. And Jagjivan Ram screamed at the journalists, "Is Khambakht Mulk mein ek Chamar Kabhi Sardar nahi ban sakta hai." So JP, he had a quick consultation with Chandrasekhar, and JP wrote out a note apologizing to Jagjivan Ram and to H.N. Bahuguna. And after JP apologized to Jagjivan Ram and Bahuguna, he persuaded them that in the interest of the nation, these two, that is Jagjivan Ram and H.N. Bahuguna, should join Morarji Desai's cabinet. And I think to rein in Morarji Desai, JP also announced that Chandrasekhar had been in jail throughout the emergency, in spite of being a Congress MP and the leader of the Young Turks faction in the Congress party. So JP announced that Chandrasekhar would not be in the cabinet, but that instead Chandrasekhar would be the president of the Janata Party. And Chandrabhanu Gupta and Nanaji Deshmukh and George Fernandez, they immediately endorsed Chandrasekhar as the Janata Party president. And Chandrasekhar was very, very close to JP. In fact, JP regarded Chandrasekhar as his political heir. And Morarji Desai and Chandrasekhar also detested each other. And Chandrasekhar also hated the RSS. Chandrasekhar was a very staunch socialist. So my surmise is that JP, who had found himself entangled in the tentacles of the RSS, of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. In fact, in another video, I had explained how and why JP got involved with the RSS. And in fact, JP's getting involved with the RSS was a major trigger for Indira Gandhi declaring the emergency. So my conjecture is that JP chose Chandrasekhar as the Janata Party president to curb the power of the RSS over the Janata government, because Chandrasekhar just detested the RSS. And Nanaji Deshmukh, who was instrumental in uniting the various parties together, and Nanaji Deshmukh was second only to JP in leading the opposition to Indira Gandhi since 1974. So Nanaji Deshmukh did something which was very noble and self-sacrificing. He declined the offer to become the deputy prime minister and the industry minister, and instead, at the moment of his greatest triumph, when he could become the deputy prime minister, Nanaji Deshmukh retired from public life and he went to concentrate on social work in a remote village near Chitrakoot. And Subramanian Swamy was supremely confident that he would be made the finance minister because of his closeness to both JP and to Morarji Desai, and with Subramanian Swamy with his Harvard doctorate in economics, and he had worked with two Nobel laureates at Harvard and MIT. But Subramanian Swamy's very bitter enemy in the Janasangh, that is Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who became the foreign minister, Atal Bihari Vajpayee saw to it that Subramanian Swamy did not get any ministerial berth at all, not even a minister of state post. And in fact, the very experienced financial administrator Morarji Desai, who had long been the finance minister, both in Nehru's cabinet as well as in Indira Gandhi's cabinet. So the former finance minister Morarji Desai, he picked H.M. Patel. H.M. Patel was a retired ICS officer and the right-hand man of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Hirubhai Mulkjibhai Patel. He was a former Home Secretary and a Defense Secretary. So Morarji Desai chose H.M. Patel to be his finance minister. And so in spite of his leading role in opposing Indira Gandhi throughout the emergency and his very close association with both Jai Prakash Narayan and Morarji Desai, so Subramanian Swamy found himself completely castrated by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And in fact, the only time when Subramanian Swamy could ever become a minister was during the short-lived government of Chandrasekhar in 1990-1991. And even then, Subramanian Swamy did not get the finance portfolio which he coveted. The finance portfolio, in fact, went to Yashwant Sinha, who was a former IAS officer. So under Morarji Desai, the Janata government lasted for 2 years at least. But under either Jagjivan Ram or Charan Singh, it would not have lasted even 2 weeks because the other one would have pulled the Prime Minister down. And after JP helped them to form the government, most of the Janata Party leaders ignored JP. They just abandoned JP. They paid lip service to JP and his ideals, but hardly any of them met JP at all during his very long illness when he was undergoing dialysis and when his kidneys had failed. And it was only Chandrasekhar, who was his political heir, and Jagjivan Ram, whom JP had praised numerous times, and most importantly of all, JP's old enemy, Indira Gandhi. JP's was one of the closest friends of Indira Gandhi's parents, and during JP's very large, tragic last days, Indira Gandhi called on JP numerous times. Okay, I had earlier spoken about Hemvati Nandan Bahuguna's uncanny ability to foresee political trends months in advance and to switch parties and always ending up on the winning side. So on 2 February 1977, Bahuguna had defected from the Congress party and he derisively dubbed the emergency as 1.5% rule, and Bahuguna became a senior cabinet minister in Morarji Desai's government after JP persuaded him not to walk out. And then in 1979, Bahuguna sided with his very, very bitter enemy, Charan Singh, when Charan Singh overthrew Morarji Desai in July 1979, and Bahuguna became the Union Finance Minister in Charan Singh's government. And remember that Bahuguna and Charan Singh had detested each other for decades in Uttar Pradesh politics. But Bahuguna switched over to Charan Singh and became the Union Finance Minister. And 27 days later, when Sanjay Gandhi pulled the rug from under Charan Singh in August 1979 to dethrone Charan Singh as Prime Minister, the Union Finance Minister Hemwati Nandan Bahuguna, he went and rejoined Indira Gandhi in October 1979. So then my father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, he quipped then Bahuguna's theorem: the fastest road to power is a complete circle. So this is what my father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, had joked. Bahuguna's theorem: the fastest road to power is a complete circle. Okay, okay, finished? Okay. Please subscribe to my channels on YouTube and IGTV, and please follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please also follow me on Twitter. My Twitter account is @RVP. @RVP is my Twitter account. So on my YouTube channel, I will be uploading several more videos about politics, the economy, business and industry, and about technology, mostly about technology. Yeah. This is Ravi, Visvesvaraya, Sharada, Prasad saying goodbye. Have a great day. Okay, see you. Okay, see you. See you.